All right, today we're jumping into a concept from our source material that honestly could completely change how you see your faith in action. It's this powerful idea known as the believer's authority.
So let me start by asking you something that I think a lot of us can relate to. Have you ever been in a situation where you prayed, you really believed, but nothing happened? The situation just didn't change. I mean, that's got to be one of the most frustrating things, right? Well, our source material suggests there might be a key piece to the puzzle that many of us are missing. In fact, get this, the source we're digging into makes this really striking claim. It says that 9 out of every 10 people who are asking for prayer are missing this one fundamental concept. That's a huge number, and it really suggests that maybe we have a massive blind spot when it comes to understanding our own authority. And here it is. This is the heart of the issue, according to the source. The problem usually isn't about a lack of faith, and it's definitely not about a lack of power on God's part. It's that we are constantly asking God to do things He has already empowered and commanded us to do. So what does that actually look like in practice? Well, this brings us to our first big idea, and it's all about challenging this really common mindset in our faith, that default instinct to just sit back and passively wait for God to do something. And this is where everything kind of gets flipped on its head. You see, the common view is that we're on the sidelines, just waiting for God to step in and act. But the source material says, no, that's backward. God has already acted, and now He's actually waiting on us to step up and use what He's given us. And you can see this idea pop up in Scripture, right? Take Ephesians 3:20. It says God can do exceeding abundantly above all we ask or think, which is amazing. But it doesn't stop there. The crucial part, the condition, is right at the end, according to the power that works in us. So God's incredible power is directly linked to something that's supposed to be operating on the inside of the believer. And look, this passive way of thinking, it has some pretty serious consequences. When we just put all the responsibility on God's shoulders, it actually hinders His power from flowing through our lives. And worse, it can lead to us blaming God for the very problems we were equipped and commanded to deal with ourselves. So, if being passive isn't the answer, what is? Well, that brings us right to the core of this whole teaching, this incredible concept of God's delegated authority. Okay, to really get this, we have to understand the difference between two key words. The source talks about power, in the Greek dunamis, which is God's raw, miracle-working ability. But then there's authority, and authority is totally different. It's the legal right to use that power. And the big idea here is that this authority has been delegated to us, the believers. The source gives us a perfect analogy to make this super clear. Picture a police officer standing in the middle of the road. Now, that officer doesn't have the physical strength to stop a 10,000-pound truck. But the government they work for does. The officer has been given the authority of that government. So when they hold up their hand, that massive truck stops. Not because of their own personal power, but because of the authority they carry. Here's another way to think about it that I find really helpful. The laws of electricity, they weren't invented by Thomas Edison. They were just discovered by him. Those principles have always existed, right from the beginning of creation. So before we understood how electricity worked, all that power was just there. It existed, but it was totally unused. After we discovered how to harness it, that very same power was used to light up our entire world. The source argues it's the same way with spiritual authority. It might exist for us whether we know about it or not. The game changer is knowing it's there and then actually applying it. All right, so we've got the theory down, but what does this actually look like in real life? How do we take this from an idea to something we actually do? Let's talk about putting this authority into practice. Let's look at James 4:7. Notice what it says. It doesn't say, ask God to make the devil flee. It says, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. The action, the responsibility for resisting is placed directly on us. It's an active command, not a passive suggestion. And it gets even more direct over in Matthew chapter 10 when Jesus is talking to his disciples. He doesn't say, hey, pray that I'll go heal the sick. He gives them a direct command. You heal the sick. You cleanse the lepers. He's telling them to be the ones who do it, to be the agents of the action. You know, this points out something really interesting, almost an inconsistency in how we often approach our faith. Think about it. When it comes to sharing the gospel, we get it. We know we have to actively go and preach. We don't just sit at home and pray for people to magically get saved. And yet, when it comes to things like healing, our mindset often shifts completely to just passively praying and waiting. Why the difference?
A perfect example of this comes from the story of Cornelius in the book of Acts. An angel shows up and talks to him, but the angel can't actually share the gospel with him. Now, why is that? The angel had the message, but the authority to preach was given specifically to disciples, to people. So the angel literally had to tell Cornelius, go find Peter, because a human had to be the one to do the job.
Okay, so let's pull all of this together. What does this mean for you and me right now in our own lives? How can we actually apply this? The source shares this really powerful story about a minister named John G. Lake. His family had been devastated by sickness, and as his sister lay dying, he was just desperately praying. And then he got this revelation. He'd been waiting on God to do something, but God was actually waiting on him to use the authority he'd already been given. The moment he shifted from asking to commanding, his sister was healed and his entire ministry was transformed. So let's wrap this up. What are the big things to remember from all this? First, you have been given authority over the enemy. Second, think of this authority as your delegated right to use God's power. Third, and this is crucial, it requires your active participation, not passive waiting. And that leads to the final challenge, to stop asking God to do what he's already told you to do. And that really leaves us with one final big question to think about. If this is all true, what could change? In your life, in your family, in your community, what could be different if you stopped just waiting and started actively using the authority you've already been given?